My ex-best friend faked a friendship to steal my fiancé, so I exposed her on our podcast. The microphone was hot in my hands, the red recording light blinking like a warning beacon. I was sitting in my home studio, the same studio where my best friend Rachel and I had recorded over 200 episodes of our relationship podcast. 2 hearts, 1 mic. We had built a loyal following, thousands of listeners who trusted our advice, who believed we were the embodiment of friendship and love. But Rachel had been lying to them. She had been lying to me. For months, she had been secretly sabotaging my relationship with my fiancé, Jordan, feeding him lies about me, manipulating situations to make me look jealous and controlling, all while pretending to be my biggest supporter. She wanted him for herself, and she had almost succeeded. But I had evidence, hours and hours of recordings from our podcast prep sessions where she had accidentally confessed her true intentions. And tonight, I was going to release the truth to every single listener who had ever trusted us. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming my voice. I met Rachel in college, freshman year, during the chaos of orientation week. She was loud, funny, and impossible to ignore. I was quieter, more reserved, the kind of person who needed a friend like her to pull me out of my shell. We became inseparable almost immediately. We shared classes, meals, and eventually an apartment off campus. She was the sister I never had, the person I called first with good news and bad news alike. When I started dating Jordan sophomore year, Rachel was my biggest cheerleader. She helped me pick out my outfit for our first date, gave me advice on what to say, and celebrated with me when we became official. She was the maid of honor at our engagement party, crying happy tears as she hugged me. But looking back, I can see the cracks now, the subtle jabs disguised as jokes, the way her face would tighten slightly when Jordan walked into the room, the comments she would make about how lucky I was, how Jordan was too good for someone like me. I dismissed it as her being protective, her way of keeping me grounded. I didn't want to believe that my best friend could be jealous of me. That would have meant admitting that our friendship wasn't as solid as I thought. The podcast was Rachel's idea. She had always been the ambitious one, the one with big dreams and the confidence to chase them. "We have so much to say," she told me one night, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've been through everything together. Relationships, heartbreak, dating disasters. People need to hear our story. We're relatable, authentic, and we're hilarious." I was hesitant at first. I was a private person, and the thought of sharing my personal life with strangers made me nervous. But Rachel was persuasive, and eventually I agreed. 2 Hearts, 1 Mic launched 6 months later. It was a modest start, just a few dozen listeners, mostly friends and family. But Rachel was relentless. She promoted the podcast on social media, reached out to other creators for collaborations, and hustled harder than anyone I had ever known. Within a year, we had thousands of listeners. Within 2 years, we had sponsorships, brand deals, and a genuine fan base. We were invited to speak at conferences, featured in articles, and even interviewed by a major podcast network. It was everything Rachel had ever wanted, and I was happy to share it with her. But success changed her. She became competitive in ways that were subtle at first. She started talking over me during episodes, dismissing my opinions as too safe or not spicy enough. She would edit the podcast to make herself sound more confident and me sound more hesitant. She took credit for our best ideas, telling sponsors that she was the creative force behind the show. I let it slide. I didn't want to cause conflict. I told myself that she was just excited, that her enthusiasm sometimes came across as arrogance. I made excuses for her because I loved her. The real problem started when I got engaged to Jordan. I had been dating him for 7 years, and our relationship was rock solid. He was kind, patient, and completely devoted to me. He proposed during a weekend getaway to the mountains, a romantic gesture that still makes me smile when I think about it. Rachel was the first person I called. She screamed with excitement on the phone, promised to help me plan the wedding, and told me I was the luckiest woman in the world. But something was off. Her congratulations felt rehearsed, her enthusiasm hollow. I noticed she started spending more time around Jordan, texting him privately, making excuses to be alone with him. I noticed the way she would touch his arm during conversations, laughing too loudly at his jokes. I noticed how she would undermine me when I was around, making passive-aggressive comments about my cooking, my job, even my sense of style. I should have trusted my instincts, but I didn't want to believe that the person I loved most in the world, besides Jordan, could betray me. So I ignored the red flags. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Rachel was just going through something, that she needed my support, not my suspicion. I stayed loyal to her, even when my gut screamed that something was wrong. The breaking point came 3 months before our wedding. Jordan and I had been fighting more than usual. He was distant, irritable, and constantly on his phone. When I confronted him, he accused me of being jealous and controlling. He said I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. He told me I was acting like my mother, which he knew was the cruelest thing he could say. I was devastated. I didn't understand what had changed. Then I found the messages on his phone. They weren't explicit, not exactly, but they were were intimate, flirtatious, and deeply personal. They were from Rachel. She had been texting him for months, telling him that I was too much, that I was emotionally unstable, that he deserved someone who understood him. She was systematically poisoning him against me, using everything she knew about me as ammunition. My insecurities, my fears, my vulnerabilities. She weaponized them all. I confronted her and she denied everything. She said I was crazy. She said I was jealous of her success. She said I was trying to sabotage her podcast because I couldn't handle her being more popular than me. She cried, she screamed, she made me feel like I was the villain. And for a moment, I almost believed her. I almost convinced myself that I was the problem, that I was paranoid, controlling, and unhinged. But then I remembered something. I had been recording our podcast prep sessions for years, not to use against her, but to review and improve our content. I had hours of footage that she didn't know about. I went back through those recordings and I found them. The moments where she had accidentally confessed her true intentions. The moments where she had revealed her jealousy, her resentment, her desire for Jordan. It was all there on tape. I had proof that she had been manipulating me, Jordan, and our entire friendship from the beginning. I didn't confront her again. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. Instead, I started planning. I edited together a special episode of our podcast. I called it The Truth About Two Hearts. I included all the recordings, all the confessions, all the evidence. I added my own voiceover, explaining what had happened, how Rachel had betrayed me, how she had tried to steal my fiancé and destroy my life. I uploaded the episode to our podcast feed, set it to release automatically at midnight, and waited. I knew it would destroy her. I knew it would end our friendship, but I also knew I had no choice. She had left me no choice. The days leading up to the release were agonizing. I barely slept, barely ate. I replayed the episode in my head 100 times, questioning if I was doing the right thing. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered the messages on Jordan's phone. I remembered how she had looked me in the eye and called me crazy. I remembered the years of gaslighting, manipulation, and betrayal. She hadn't just hurt me, she had tried to destroy everything I love. And she had almost succeeded. I met with Jordan the morning of the release. I showed him the footage. I showed him the evidence. He watched in silence, his face pale, his hands trembling. When the recording finished, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I believed her. I trusted her more than I trusted you. "I am so sorry." He begged me to forgive him. He said he had been manipulated, that he hadn't known what he was doing. I told him I needed time. I wasn't going to make any decisions in the middle of a crisis. But I knew deep down that our relationship was over. The trust was broken, and I wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. At midnight, the episode went live. I watched the downloads spike, the comments flood in, the notifications explode. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Our listeners were shocked, angry, and heartbroken. They had loved Rachel, trusted her, believed in her, and she had betrayed them too. The next morning, Rachel called me, screaming. She called me every name in the book, accused me of ruining her life, threatened to sue me. I listened to her rage, and then I calmly explained that I had the legal right to use the recordings because they were work product. I reminded her that our friendship had been built on lies and that I was finally telling the truth. She hung up. I haven't spoken to her since. The aftermath was chaotic. Sponsors pulled out, fans unsubscribed, and Rachel disappeared from social media entirely. But I didn't stop. I rebranded the podcast as One Heart, a solo show where I shared my journey of healing, self-discovery, and rebuilding my life. It was terrifying putting myself out there without Rachel's confidence to hide behind, but it was also liberating. I was finally telling my story, my way, without anyone manipulating me or diminishing me. The audience that stayed was loyal, supportive, and deeply invested in my journey. They had watched me survive betrayal, and they wanted to see me thrive. The first few months after the episode were surreal. I woke up every day to a firestorm of messages, emails, and comments. Some people praised me for my bravery, for standing up to a toxic friend. Others accused me of being vindictive, of ruining someone's life for personal gain. I read every single comment, internalizing the praise and trying to ignore the criticism. It was hard. It was so hard. There were days when I questioned everything, when I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. But then I would remember the messages on Jordan's phone, the years of gaslighting, the way Rachel had looked me in the eye and called me crazy, and I would remind myself that I hadn't started this war. I had only ended it. Rachel predictably went underground. She deleted all her social media accounts, changed her phone number, and disappeared from our shared social circle. I heard through mutual friends that she had moved to a different city, started a new job, and was trying to rebuild her life. I also heard that she was telling anyone who would listen that I had fabricated the evidence, that I was a jealous, vindictive liar who had ruined her out of spite. It stung, but I didn't engage. I had learned that you can't reason with someone who is determined to believe their own lies. The hardest part was losing my friendship with her. Despite everything, I had loved her. She had been my sister, my confidant, my partner in crime. We had shared so many memories, so many moments of joy and laughter. It felt like a death, a grief that I had to process alone. I started therapy, desperate to understand how I had let myself be manipulated so completely. My therapist helped me see that Rachel's behavior was a reflection of her own insecurity, not a failure on my part. She helped me understand that I had been codependent, that I had sacrificed my own well-being to maintain a friendship that wasn't healthy. It was a hard truth to face, but it was also liberating. I was finally taking responsibility for my own happiness. I also had to deal with the fallout with Jordan. He had been genuinely manipulated, but that didn't excuse his actions. He had chosen to believe Rachel over me. He had chosen to trust her more than the woman he was supposed to marry. We tried couples therapy, but the trust was broken. Every time I looked at him, I saw his text messages to her. Every time he touched me, I remembered how he had pushed me away. Eventually, I made the painful decision to end the engagement. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I loved him, but I couldn't marry someone who had so easily believed the worst of me. The weeks after the breakup were bleak. I felt like I had lost everything. My best friend, my fiancé, my sense of self. I barely left my apartment, barely ate, barely slept. I stopped recording the podcast, convinced I had nothing left to say. But then slowly something started to shift. I started writing again, journaling my thoughts and feelings in a way I hadn't done since college. I started going for walks, forcing myself to leave the house even when I didn't want to. I started reaching out to old friends, the ones I had neglected during my friendship with Rachel, and they welcomed me back with open arms. One of those friends was a woman named Nina, an old college roommate who had seen Rachel's toxic behavior long before I did. I always knew she was bad news, Nina told me one night over a glass of wine. But you were so devoted to her. I didn't want to come between you. It was a comfort to know that I wasn't crazy, that someone else had seen the warning signs. Nina encouraged me to start recording the podcast again. This time as a solo venture. You have a unique voice, she said. You don't need Rachel to be interesting. You were always the one with the depth, the insight. She was just the loud one. I took her advice. I rebranded the podcast as One Heart, a show about healing, self-discovery, and rebuilding after betrayal. The first few episodes were raw and emotional. I cried on air. I admitted my fears and insecurities. I was more vulnerable than I had ever been. And the response was overwhelming. Listeners wrote to me in droves, sharing their own stories of betrayal, thanking me for giving them the courage to walk away from toxic relationships. I realized that my pain had a purpose. I was helping people heal, and that was the most powerful feeling in the world. I also realized that I didn't need a partner to be happy. For the first time in my adult life, I was single, and I was okay with it. I traveled solo, took cooking classes, learned to paint. I rediscovered hobbies I had abandoned years ago. I reconnected with my family, repaired relationships I had neglected. I was building a life that was entirely my own, and it felt incredible. A year after the episode, I received an unexpected message. It was from Jordan. He had been in therapy, he said. He had come to understand how his insecurities had made him vulnerable to Rachel's manipulation. He apologized, genuinely and profusely. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life, and he regretted it every single day. He asked if I would give him another chance. I read his message 3 times, and then I deleted it. I had moved on. I was no longer the woman who needed his validation. I had built a life I was proud of, a life that didn't depend on anyone else. Rachel, meanwhile, was struggling. I heard through the grapevine that her new job hadn't worked out, that she had alienated her new colleagues with the same toxic behavior, that she was desperately trying to claw her way back to relevance. But no one trusted her anymore. I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't wish her well either. She was simply someone I used to know, a chapter of my life that was permanently closed. 2 years after the episode, I released my 100th solo episode. It was a celebration of everything I had overcome. I had a successful podcast, a loyal audience, and a new sense of purpose. I had started writing a book, a memoir about my journey. I had fallen in love again, this time with a man named Ethan who was kind, patient, and completely devoted to me. He knew my story, and he accepted all of it. He didn't try to change me or save me. He just loved me, exactly as I was. But the most important love story was the one I had with myself. I had finally learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries, to walk away from people who didn't respect me. I had learned that being alone was better than being with someone who made me feel small. I had learned that my voice mattered, even when no one else was listening. And I had learned that the best revenge wasn't destroying someone else. It was building a life so beautiful that the people who had hurt you could never be part of it. I look back on that night in the recording studio, the night I released the episode that changed everything, and I feel a sense of peace. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. It was me reclaiming my power, my story, my truth. Rachel had tried to take everything from me, but she had only made me stronger. She had shown me who I really was, and I am grateful for that. The final episode of my podcast, the one I released on the 2-year anniversary of the betrayal, was titled Gratitude. I thanked my listeners for staying with me. I thanked my friends for supporting me. I thanked Rachel in a way for teaching me what I was made of. I wouldn't be here without her, I said, my voice steady and clear. She broke my heart, but she also broke the chains I was wearing. She set me free. I smiled as I pressed stop on the recording. The red light blinked off, and I sat in the silence, feeling content. I had come so far. I had survived, and I had thrived. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had reclaimed her life, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that I would never be that vulnerable again. I had learned to protect my heart, to trust my instincts, and to never let anyone dim my light. The podcast continued to grow. I signed a book deal, started a YouTube channel, and began speaking at conferences. My story resonated with people all over the world. I was proof that it was possible to rebuild after betrayal. I was proof that the best revenge was a life well lived. And I was proof that sometimes the hardest things in life lead to the most beautiful outcomes. I still think about Rachel sometimes, not with anger or sadness, but with a kind of detached curiosity. I wonder if she ever regretted what she did. I wonder if she ever realized how much she had hurt me. But I don't dwell on it. She is a ghost from my past, and I am living fully in the present. I have everything I could ever want: a loving partner, a fulfilling career, and a deep sense of peace. I have healed, I have moved on, and I am happier than I ever thought possible. The story of Rachel and me is not a tragedy. It is a triumph. It is the story of a woman who refused to be destroyed by someone else's jealousy. It is the story of a woman who found her voice, even when it was the hardest thing she had ever done. And it is the story of a woman who learned finally that the most important relationship is the one you have with yourself. I am proud of that woman. I am proud of myself. And I know that my story is not over. There are still so many chapters to write, so many adventures to have, so much love to give. But I am ready. I am stronger than I have ever been. And I am never going to let anyone steal my happiness again.